So, guys, welcome back to MGD, another session of Main Gate Darbar. And some of you, lovely to see a lot of new faces today. And we'll keep having people pop by, and quite a few people are watching on FB Live also, and people tend to see it afterwards. So today we have Michael Foley, who was that senior we all looked up to when we came on campus. He was blessed with skills before he came to NID only. Today he's going to share some of his school sketches I was seeing and felt like retiring from design already. So it's lovely to have Michael. We're all influenced by him, and everybody in the product design studio used to try and copy his style of drawing and his designs. And we have Abhijit, who worked with him in Titan, who's going to be doing the session today. And like I always say, the host plays a very important part in this format because it's really about a conversation more than a presentation. And it's about finding out things we don't know about the person. We all know Michael and his work. It's more about unraveling what we don't know. And thanks, Abhijit, for making this happen. He was a guy who's sort of, they're behind the scenes. They had discussions and planned out what's going to happen. So I'm going to now spotlight Michael and Bansod, and I'm going to mute myself. Michael, unmute yourself.
Sajid, I think, as you talked about that, when you sort of study in NID, you know so many people, mostly seniors, which you probably never met them. And they are like part of this legendary folklore, and and Mike was definitely part of that. I mean, like all this probably 5 or 10 batch after we heard so many stories about his work. Uh, I saw some of his work in NID, especially that I remember the tractor rendering hand sketch with poster color. Looked like an unattainable kind of a story, when I looked at that. Uh, and then I never thought I'll end up being in Titan one day, and I'm gonna be really sort of seeing him in person. But here I was in Titan. I was fortunate to work with him for close 8 years. I mean, and this like something about Mary movie. I could probably make a movie called something about Mike. Everyone loves him, man, and everyone adores him for something. And yes, he's amazingly gifted with excellent skills, okay, and a sense of elegance, and that's the part which I like about him is that he lives that life and he builds that in his design or in his work, uh, in his design, in his life, and what makes his unique is his humility. He's usually a shy and gets very uncomfortable in public appearances. While eating and on stage, I've seen him sweating most, and then it's really fun teasing him whenever he could really go onto stage for a launch or something like that. Uh, he's made a tremendous, exceptional contribution to product design. I would say that because we've seen fashion designers building a very powerful brands for themselves, and he's almost achieved that brand like status today. And we've seen him in theaters, in coming in commercials, and it's kind of feel really proud because and that's sort of really that leap which is taken beyond industry problem solving to creating a brand where people want to be with him to really take in bring his thought to the brand. uh, so here, and welcome to the MGD, Mike. It's been really amazing to have you here.
Hey,
uh,
thanks.
this platform has been really very wonderful, where we just really chatting and understanding what really made what you are today. And so I always knew that you wanted to sort of build something, and I could map it out even 10 years back. This is something you wanted to be here, and you spoke about that so many times. But what was your childhood like? What was when this sort of clarity came in? How did you incline yourself towards the creative art or expression? Uh, so just tell us about your really childhood to sort of journey to Titan, sorry, NID, and um, just connect those dots because it's really, I'm sure you have a lot which influenced you, as a child to really be?
Yeah, I think first of all, okay, yeah, I think I had stage fright, so this is a very good platform for comfort in speaking to everybody, and that's never changed. I was like this as a child as well. So for me, I think I my dad was in the army, so we actually had the fortunate experience of actually being outdoor and on the border of Rajasthan, Punjab for most of my school days. And that kind of got me opened up to looking at things outside the house, and I was out most of the time. And I think the other thing that kind of really influenced me is this whole aspect that dad actually, being in the army, actually was very, very interested in painting. So he used to paint, and I used to just look at him paint. And over time, he would ask me to. He figured that I could sketch well, and I don't know when I started. I think it was about 4 or 5 years old. And I used to collect stuff earlier, and I think the earliest piece that I still have is about when I was 8 years old, and it kind of slowly moved to me creating dad's canvases, and over time he would let me paint them. So it kind of got from there to, I think I was quite confused as a child. I think I was interested in art, and I was very keen on science in some way. I was just amazed by this whole aspect of nature and the basic phenomenon of nature, refraction, reflection, and I just couldn't pinpoint any career that really fit into this. I knew at that point there was just this option of an engineer and medicine and possibly architecture. And for me, I think all through childhood, I was actually geared up to be an architect because I kind of had this sense to. I used to like building stuff, basically recycle things, use paper, build things. So I think that kind of really got me into something creative. I was quite confused. I was not sure that I was, I think, geared up for any specific discipline that I knew. And at that point, I had no clue of design. So I think that's something that really was the most confusing part. So till class 11, I think till class 12, I had no clue they existed a field called design, and then beyond that, product design and all that. So I think that itself kind of got me a little uh, confused right through. But I used to kind of just rely on my own interest in things that I did, which is watercolors, building things, and I think that just took me right through in terms of my childhood. And I wasn't much of a studious student. I mean, I did reasonably okay, but for me, the interest was not in studies. So I knew I wasn't. There was nothing like an engineering or anything that was in that field that I could, really be, because I always thought I wasn't smart enough for something that had science, hardcore science in it. So it was a little bit of a blend. So in some way, it was forming me towards design, but I never knew it was actually literally going there. So I started preparing for JJ School of Arts, and
So, Mike, I want to go back a bit. Four brothers, amazing four brothers, okay, and a family. So you can get 25% of your parents' time, in fighting for it, and all four, except your elder brother, I never met, but I know Neil and Nigel. They are unique characters in own way. So, but you are very different, I know, in that. So how, and you're not the eldest one, right? I mean,
yeah. So I was in the middle. I was the second, and my.
okay.
So I think what happened was,
that,
yeah.
how this
So
four brothers and what you guys did as a child, together.
So I think as my eldest brother was into electronics, so he used to basically dismantle anything that he saw that had electronics in it. So I was quite, uh, I, in, not really. I didn't hang out with him, but I just was quite inspired by the way he tinker with anything. So he actually kind of got me. He used to sketch as well, and I was actually quite inspired by the fact that he'd sketch. And he stopped somewhere, and he was left-handed. So I think I don't know what it was, but I ended up looking at him for a lot of what he did. So I ended up being left-handed in some way. And then my two other brothers landed up, which is Neil and Nigel. Now, I mean, all three of us are in the design field. And Neil and Nigel, I think, were the more outdoor kind. So I ended up being, hanging around with them a lot. So I ended up becoming a lot more outdoorsy in some way. And we were quite competitive. I think between three of us, if we painted, then somebody else had to paint, and we'd all kind of figure out who did it better. So there was this unsaid competition amongst all of us, and that's something that kept us all going actually, and it really got us, pushed each of us pushed each other in some ways. So in that sense, it was really very interesting. So maybe I can just share screen, and then you can walk through Abby in that, just to just show a little bit of it. That's me, I think 5 years old, and this is the four of us. The one in the third is actually Nigel, so we kind of switch seats there. And then I think just before NID, we all, really were skin and bones and similar attitude in some way. And we were all keen on very similar things. I think except for Nevin, who was very analytical, three of us were largely in the whole creative space. I think Neil and Nigel were a lot more into outdoor gaming, all kinds of other things. So I think I kind of fell in the between, and I ended up spending a lot of time painting. So I literally start from sunrise to sunset on a Saturday, and then keep painting. So I think that is something that kept me going. And then, like I said, I think Dad and Mom were the ones that really got me inspired to do stuff. And given that Dad was in the army, it was quite amazing that he actually looked at the creative field as something that could be a possibility to pursue a career. And in fact, he himself did an animation course for himself, and that really got me inspired. And another thing was my mother's mother was into upcycling anything that she could see. So nothing left the house. If a card came in, she cut that back and make it into another card that could be sent out. So in some way, I think that whole field to make things came from my mother's side. So just a quick glimpse of my
so
family
just
now.
hold on to you. I want to ask you a question. Where I've seen auntie, I've seen uncle. I mean, there's aunties so much of it energy, and I mean, she'll push things around, get things done. Uncle has been really gentle, quiet. So I mean, is your character I've seen very closely being very being very gentle with things. You don't judge people mostly, in that case. I've not seen you getting angry or shouting at anyone. It's came from that? I mean, because I've seen Dad being very calm and amazingly post.
So I think it happened over years. I've ended up like that, but I had a really bad temper. In fact, I was the worst of the four of us, and pull curtains down, if I didn't get my way, and all kinds of things. So I think that slowly.
What changed that part to become?
I think I just the fact that I was on my own very, very often, which is doing my own thing, just looking at things. I think I just kind of softened out over time and started realizing there's no point beating yourself, wanting your things. So I think over the 12 years, kind of just transformed into, everybody has a space in life, and so do you. So don't let everyone have their voice, so don't shout over somebody else. So I think it kind of reflected what Dad was, and most people are shocked that he was in the army and turned out to be a lieutenant general. And normally you have to be really,
it's too sweet.
Really, stern and things like that. But I think he really did well for himself there. So I think that kind of really moved me to NID. This is my family. Just give you a quick glimpse of it. That's 5 years back. That's my daughter, Vivian, and she's now 10. That's Tabitha, my wife. And of course, this is them now. And pandemic actually added another one to our family. We had a stray dog that was behind one of the markets here, and we kind of picked that up. And he's been quite a lot of stress during pandemic, but now very happy that we have him. And of course, like I said, I think this whole idea of the army experience really got me connected to nature a lot. I mean, we spent, like I said, a lot of time around the border, open spaces, and I think I started learning a lot about nature. And I was just inspired by it. And I've just taken a picture of one of Dad's paintings, and this is one that I think he did when I was 10 years old. And that's when I started getting, I was already drawing reasonably well. And I used to make these canvases and he'd paint these. And I started. This is Dad.
Oh, wow.
And he was interested in nature, and I think that whole interest in nature came from him, from me, and he loved animals. So I basically followed his lead on doing stuff. I didn't have a mind of my own at that point. I mean, Dad would say paint this, and I painted. So I used to look at pictures, look at things that were being done, and just learn through that. So I think a lot of my childhood went in studying other artists and painting their paintings in some way, and just kind of deciphering. I didn't really think about originality at that point. It was just about learning. And mom also used to paint, and I think she stopped painting when we started painting. So I think she kind of moved on to all the other things. And so I kind of saw myself as an artist for many years, and that's one of the dilemmas that I had when I joined NID. I think when I joined, I was confused for 1.5 years as to what I should do. So I picked a few. I have a few scans of some of the old work. This is old. This is when I was 9 years old. And watercolors. I was interested in poster. I pick whatever paint, whatever paper, and then just paint. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of them. I've just given off most of them. And this started me off on a journey that years and years went by. Every weekend was on painting. I just look at something and paint it. And this was, I think, when I was 11. And I think between 8 and 12 was probably my most prolific time, just watercolors and poster colors. And I think it got me interested in light, shadow, play, form, a lot of things indirectly, which I didn't know. It was just that I liked doing all of this. And then this was when I was, I think, 13 or 14.
My God, how long did you do this, Mike?
This took me about a week to do, and I spent 2 days a week to do it, and then over some time. And I used to get back from school, paint a little bit, 2 hours, and then get just keep doing it. And this we used to sell. I mean, I used to sell these at some 100 rupees, $200, and make up some pocket money in those days.
And what you do with your money?
Nothing. I just give it off. I think I bought stuff for my parents and just or give it to them to collect. So I had a whole lot of these paintings that really got me enamored with nature. And I think that's something that really stuck on to me in many ways. I mean, I don't paint like this anymore, but I really liked an artist called Maurice Ledger. He'd done a whole lot of birds, so I used to just look at his paintings and paint them. And again, like I said, I think this whole seed of originality really didn't fall into place for a long time. I just enjoyed painting things, and it just went on for. Then I started looking at originality, and I said, why should I? I've built enough skill, and this was when I was, I think, 14. I started doing my own things, just paint, compose things, collect things from the garden, put them together, and just compose paintings out of it. Take some time, and I was at that point into a lot of detail. I just love detail, and I thought,
incredible.
Without detail, it wasn't a painting in some ways. So I mean, that's changed as well. But this is something I used to enjoy.
Dried leaf, that little in the right corner, bottom.
So it kind of got me into a lot of things. Like I started getting interested in water, refraction, reflections. What can you see through water?
Before seeing the Aisha's work, right? Much before.
Yeah. This is long before. This is again in school, and so I was in some way isolated or insular in some way about this, and I just would enjoy doing it. So I composed paintings, sketch them out, then over the next weekend build a little bit, constantly sketch. And I think one of the things I used to do, which I don't have any pieces of work now because it was childhood days, is this whole thing of books of studies. So I used to study nature a lot, sketch them myself, read about it, and then understand how water reflects, angle of refraction, and kind of got me into other things, which opened up, I guess now realize it's a sweet spot in building something that has a good balance of maybe the three-dimensional aspect to it. So I think that got, I mean, I over time I think I've run out of count, but I've just given off on most of what I have. And these are just scans of some of what I did. This is what I've done now. I mean, this is what given the time I have, it's ended up being something which is faster, quicker, finish it in a couple of hours, 2 hours, and you're just done with it. And if you show this to my mother and father, they say there's no detail in it. So, but it's changed. I think for me, it was just this whole easing out into doing something on my own. So I started looking at this whole street vendors in Bangalore and started taking pictures of a whole lot of them, composing pictures, and then just building up my line of watercolors. So I've done a lot of these. And then I looked at old Bangalore, and I think old Bangalore itself is depleting by the minute, old houses and things like that. So I think that kind of really, in some ways, kind of reflection of what I did when I was a child. And I think it's kind of has some, I don't know, something that kind of gets me to bond a lot with watercolors even now, but I don't have the time to do it. So the one thing that during my childhood, I mean, like I said, I didn't have too much that I could show you here, but I used to study the human body a lot in school. I think class 9, 10, 11. I used to study my own body, lock myself in the loo, draw shoulder muscles, the whole thing of forms. And I was inspired by Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, that's the only inspiration I had ever as a child. And I was quite amazed by what he could do. And one would say that you could never imagine anything even remotely close to what he does. So it just got me inspired.
This exposure, or how did that exposure happen? I mean, Dad will bring all these books at childhood.
So yeah, so I think Dad figured out that I was interested in something in the middle. I think not an artist, but something. So he would just he'd show me a lot of stuff. I mean, there was a book called The Venture Print, which is a whole lot of book artists compilations. So he'd bring in, and he himself was quite keen on, illustrating and learning how to draw forms, human forms, etc. So I think he would show me stuff, and I used to visit the library a lot, and somewhere things kind of connected. I mean, that really got me really clued on to figuring out now this. I'm confused now. Class 12, I really didn't know what I want, and it was then it was clear that even architecture was not my space. But Dad said, I mean, anyway, go for an interview and just try it. So we just got prepared for JJ School of Architecture, and then one day he said he saw a newspaper ad and said it said National Institute of Design. So he himself, design. I don't know how he connected it to what I did, but he said maybe something that could work for you. So I said, yeah, I will go and try it. And he knew I was a very nervous child. I think I was extremely shy and I wouldn't step up. So he used to train me up on speaking. He used to train me up on, articulating words, practice what you say, and then go and, do it. So I just applied for the interview. I got through, and then it was the final interview, which is about 100 people come for it. And that's where he kind of just mentored me on how to speak, what to speak, just be I mean, that whole thing was quite nice. I mean, it kind of gave me possibly the legs to kind of speak and show. And I didn't like showing stuff to anybody. It was just things that I had. And, I mean, somewhere down the line, it kind of just fell into place, and I joined. That's.
Do you remember the whole sort of experience of NID interview and what really happened?
Yeah, so that one day that I was very, very nervous. I think for me, it was somebody had warned me that there was this psychiatrist who would actually throw a bucket of water. The last time he threw it on a team, and then they just looked at reactions of people, and then took that as a reference as to how people would behave. And I think he was called Pulin Garg, if I remember. And so I was extremely nervous, and I was trying hard to try and do the best that you can possibly. So there were a couple of team exercises, and then they took us to the workshop, and we had to create something out of red ceramic, plaster Paris. And I think I started enjoying it. It was just that it was a collection of. It was like an exam, so any exam stresses you out, and that is the only thing I was worried that stress kind of brings down your freedom to think in many ways. And but somehow I think that when I showed my paintings in the last interview, I mean, they were quite surprised as to what I did in my school days. And then at that point I was still thinking maybe it's something two-dimensional graphics. Not really graphics is the word, but something in that visual space is what I was interested in when I joined NIT. And I got through. So I think that was a massive relief that finally there was a career that connected.
How was the whole part of interaction being in NID? Was there any sort of, usually we talked about the culture shock stories, how did that really, what experiences or you remember from your first year or early days of NID?
Yeah, so I think I was quite inspired by the props, the space itself. There was this dinosaur metal sculpture that the campus had. I'm not sure if it's still there, but that was like, I mean, something beautiful. I mean, this whole thing of installations, largely like elements, this whole open space and greenery kind of got you lost in the space, and I quite like that about the architecture. So that's one thing that really got to me. I think I came from the first year. I had this steel trunk called, my dad was in the College of Combat, which is an army uh, unit it's a college in Mao. And when I brought that trunk and that got into the hostel, everyone thought I was from some martial arts college. So they were initially quite scared of me. This guy is from College of Combat, and he probably has some martial arts skills to it. And then they realized I was, diametrically opposite to that. But I think the first year was a nervous year. Foundation was quite a eye opener in the sense the fact that you had to unlearn a lot of things that I did. I didn't really use anything that I learned as a child, but I started using those as I was just confident sketching. So that whole confidence kind of got me through in terms of being able to do things fast and just build on what I had. So I was quite open. For me, it was not. I think I just wanted to learn. So for me, it was just about that. I think my entire 5 years, I was more focused on trying to do stuff to figure out what my career would be and how to design than anything else. But I enjoyed it. I think at the end of it, it was quite a, I got back a little to what I used to do. This whole thing of how do I bring this back. So in fact, this is one of the sketches I did and gave to Srinivas, who was part of my batch. And he actually sent it to me, saying this is one of the things I did. I forgot about this whole thing about. So if you can see, I mean, there's a little bit of what I did as a child as well. But like I said, I think NID opened up this whole essence of looking at objects and human forms, nature.
What point you realize that it's not graphic design, it's product design? How did that choice you made?
So I think because of what I liked, I was very confused because I was still, an artist in some way in my mind. And I think I finished foundation. I joined graphic design, and yeah. So I joined graphic design, and at that point, fortunately, there were a couple of batchmates who actually jumped into the wrong field as well. And I think I don't remember which month, but then I was saying, no, this is what I really, really want. And I just asked the faculty and said, can you please move me to product design? Because I just said there's something missing. This whole thing of, it was a little, I mean, I love the visual arts in many ways. And I still remain confused about it. But I just found, I don't know, there was no advice from anybody on that. It's just that I used to go by my gut and intuition on what I think would work. And for me, product design just was a sweet spot. It was just ideal for what I wanted to do. And I think from then on, it was just, I enjoyed everything that I did. I started saying that let's use sketching as a tool and no longer as art. And, that whole thing moved to, let me communicate with sketches. And it was only about communicating. It was not about how good that sketch is, how well you can communicate something. So it kind of ended up being a lot of what I learned as, things that I started using. Obviously, this is the only picture I could find of an idea. Okay, so the bad news is I had all my work thrown out at the end of 4 years because I came late to the college and they cleared up my room and my trunk was thrown out. I managed to retrieve, I think, 15, 20 sheets of projects across 4 years. So this is one that I had, so I wanted to show it to you. Arundeep on top, who was my roommate. This is a part of my batch, and this I think in the foundation year, where we were kind of doing something around, I think it was about tetrahedrons and paper forms. So I think I had a little bit of a small click in ID, and I think Srinivas, Arundi, Rizvi, they're not here, but they were one click, and then my industrial design team was one click, which is 5 of us who would travel all over. And I think for me it was just I enjoyed every bit of it. I was still quite a quiet person, and didn't really do too much other than work. But yeah, there are a couple of instances when we had some interesting things that we.
I remember you talking about a lot of silly stuff you done with Giku and you.
Yeah. So there was one that Giku and I decided I think it was Giku's thought, but then he said it was a great idea. So we said, let's lock up the second floor of the hostel from the inside, because we could climb balconies there. And what we did is we took a scissors and cut all the underwears in all those rooms entirely, which is the entire floor. And we locked it from inside and then came back and locked ourselves in our room. I think we had a lot of people who were really, really angry. And I think finally they got to us as well at the end of it. But I think, I had a good time. And I think Arundeep did a lot to kind of, break the ice on. He could be very serious and people would laugh at him even when he's serious. So he could do a lot to, just be slightly out of the box without doing anything. So we used to actually jog to Paldi on our knees, folded knees, and people would laugh at us, but we used to do it so that, you get our fitness back. Then we actually ended up, for money, washing cars all around NID. So we used to do that early morning and just go out, wash cars, get that as pocket money. And then we realized you can't anyway, we're learning to be designers, can't we do that outside as well? But that, I guess, we weren't allowed then.
It was whose entrepreneurial idea was that? Giku's?
This was, I think, this is collectively, we needed money. So, your bun butters and all that were expensive. So
Michael, Giku's sister is on the call, Ramni.
Hey.
Hey,
so I
Michael.
think, hi. So I think I enjoyed that. We used to do a lot of pranks, and I think he was the instigator in some way, and I enjoyed doing a lot of it with him. So we kind of went through a lot there, and I think we started realizing, a little bit of what you can do as a designer. We weren't allowed to moonlight, and we slowly did that just to make some pocket money. And I think I remember Arundeep and I were completely in debt in third year. And we were given this chance to design a comic book for the Voluntary Health Association of India, which is Delhi. So we went and met them, and they said, here's 60,000 for a comic book. And then that was like windfall, which was unbelievable. And it just went in one day because we had debts, which is larger than that. So but it was an enjoyable experience. We actually had
huge money in that time, right?
Yeah, it was a lot. And
wow.
We actually costed it based on each image we sketched out. And so I would sketch the, I'd do the wireframes and we would color them in. And so we had this balance of work. They actually finally printed that book. It was about, something about sanitation and a couple of other things. So we kind of did a nice, that opened up this whole thing of moonlighting, which is not a good thing. But somehow got us exposed to clients and what clients do to you. So that's kind of, like I said, I think for me, it was about using what I was very comfortable with, and I ended up doing, right through actually, I was still quite keen on graphic design and product design. In some way, I kind of find that bridge, and I think that's probably one of the reasons watch design ended up being something that I enjoyed. Like I said, I used to build a lot of models and just use those as ways of getting build something which is I like this whole bridge between 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional, and I still do that now. This is something from my desk with my daughter. So I make miniatures for her, along with her, just kind of build that. So I think in some way, you know, what it NID started slowly getting me towards this whole thing of mechanics, and I started enjoying mechanics a lot. The whole thing of fundamentals of mechanisms, not really the engineering of it, but the whole thing of the wonder of mechanisms. And I literally enjoyed that. That was one of the things I love to do. And so I created a lot of things at that simple product design stage, and build up. So this is something that I think probably bridged this whole thought of wanting to do something that is solving problems, functional problems. And I think that got me to that bridge between understanding engineering and product design. I think that's something that I really found was built at NID for me. And of course, I mean, we started building objects and part of courses. And I think some of these, you realize that when you start designing objects, you start looking at for me, it was about simplicity and minimalism, and it was always the case. I mean, you take out everything out of it, and what's left is what your product should be in some way. And it has to be desirable, and that's something that I've always hooked on to. Don't make things that are functional. It has to be something that it sticks in your mind, and it's a tough thing to do. And you just have to, for one idea like this, you have to do a whole lot to even get to it, define it, and be your own devil's advocate, kind of define further. So that these are some of the things. I mean, fortunately, after my work was thrown out, I actually created these sheets, which is one sheet per project. So that's why you see them. Otherwise, there was no work there. So this was on a faculty would come in from Europe and looking at this whole thing of communication, and so design this concrete thing. So I actually ended up using a lot of the skills that I had, but like I said, it was purely for expressing what I could do. So every project I'd explore a different technique, and I kind of got reasonably versatile with a whole lot of techniques. This is an ink wash, corrugated paper. The previous one was just color pencil, and and then watercolors for another one. So it kind of ended up being skill used to communicate in many ways, and that kind of got me comfortable, thinking in divergent ways. This was the internship that kind of was a milestone for me. I think this was an internship with Aisha, and I was still a student, and they got me to design a tractor. And the unfortunate part was that they actually went up to building it and engineering it after I left. But there was a magazine from NID, I think by mistake, they printed this before the tractor was launched, and that kind of, this entire thing got collapsed, because that was the time when I was saying maybe transportation design is what I need to get into. And after that, I kind of opened up to many things. It was just, this was, I think, in some way a turning point, because what I found was the person I was working with there actually erased my signature from my sketches of the concept, because I was too young, a student doing something that somebody would, the entire team wants. Didn't seem right at that point. So they actually literally took my signature off. So when I went back, I actually took my dad again. I hung on to him and said, listen, let's get back. And I was stubborn. I said, I need my signature back on that. So we went back to Aisha then, and then took those pictures off. They apologized, and then I signed them, and then came back. Not that I got anything out of it, but it was just something that I wanted to prove that you can't be. You need to have recognition. I think at that point, recognition started becoming something that I was looking at, and I think over time that erased off. But and at that point, I was still a student, and then not being recognized for what you do as a student, you feel worse. And I think so. That was literally a changing phase for me. And
so, Mike, I want to ask you at this point where what you're thinking. I mean, at your fourth year, fifth year, you had a 5-year course. What's you gonna do? What kind of choices you thinking of? Transportation was one. How would have changed that? I mean, you had opportunities.
Yeah, so I think I was still confused at that point. I mean, frankly, was, but I was very keen on this whole basic thought of proportion, balance, in design, which is something that I saw in everything that I did. And so actually I won a competition, which is a lighting competition from Philips, and I won some money, and that money is what I used to kind of travel India to look for projects. And so I went to Bombay, got a project there with Ratan Boy, then came to Bangalore. Bangalore, I was, somewhere down the line, I think watches had the right balance of graphic design and product design for me. I just found it, just the sweet spot. I don't know what it was, but it kind of got me quite. So I said I must do something for an Indian company, HMT. And I said I must go to HMT. I have to transform what they do. They do, work which is still dated. So I went and met them. I fixed a meeting and I showed my work to HMT. And the person I don't remember the person's name now, but he actually fell off to sleep because he said, he didn't find it interesting. And that kind of put me down a lot. Then I said, I'll have to find something else. So by chance, this is all, things just fall into place. I happened to call Kaushik, and Kaushik is one of our seniors, and he said, why don't you just come and show your work and just meet up and say hi. So we did that, and I think in that conversation, somebody came over and looked at the work, and I just felt he was somebody, just one of Kaushik's colleagues. So I just went on explaining it because I came there with no agenda. And so he said, why don't you join? Why don't you just join and do a project with us? And at that point, Timex was the company that Kaushik was focusing on. Timex was part of Titan's portfolio at that point. So he said, do a project here, let's see what happens. And that's how it kind of happened. It's just organically kind of, I didn't expect anything to happen actually. And it just kind of happened,
So this Movado sketch was pre-Titan or post?
So this is around then. It was just around then that I was looking at proportions. This was during my internship. So it is before I joined, but when I was already into trying to understand what did people do in watches that was so good. So I actually did this for a lot of other watch brands to understand, just like the science of watchmaking. I actually deconstruct the watch and look at proportions. I found the mean rectangle. I found the golden proportion in some of them. So I started creating my own sense of how to design watches. Literally, what should a dial opening be if the width is a certain amount. And I think for me, it kind of connected back to this whole thing of typography, which is where I found my sweet spot in watch design. And I think that's what kind of really, got me to this whole idea of type and designing typography is pretty much like watch design. And I kind of use that principle to design the first collection of watches for Timex. And at that point, there were no tools. We weren't introduced to any software. It was just large drawings, which we color Xerox, black and white photocopy down and scale it down to the actual size of a watch. And then, literally hand paint the dials in. So some bit of my skill kind of got back to being used, but it kind of opened up this whole aspect of looking at watches differently because there were no specific marketing briefs at that point. It was, there was a reference point, but you start building that. So I started looking at, how do you design watches using tools that you have. And for me, my tools were the skills that I had. And I'd actually cut circles in these, these watch drawings and then place dials into it, which is very easy today with software. But at that point, you really have to think everything through before you even started, any of these sketches.
I remember seeing them, Mike. They were incredible. One of the leather, the camel texture you had created with poster color was like, wow. That's like the first year of and the tan leather, the left one. I remember each one of them. Beautiful. Yeah.
So I collected all of it. So that was the Timex project that I did, and then I met Mr. Desai. Mr. Desai is the founder of Titan. He's no more, but he was somebody who said, okay, so he liked the work that I did on Timex because it had a typography connect to it. So he asked me, do you want to join? So I said, yeah, maybe 2 years, and I'll join an automotive firm because I really like designing cars, like every other designer has. So he said, okay, so anyway, join. So his first project to me was the Tanishq branding, and he told me, why don't you design the branding unit. Now this actually evolved. It was actually called Celeste earlier, and Celeste and it couldn't get registered, or it felt like too much of a universal international name. So he coined the word Tanishq, which is TA from Tata, and Nishq, which is coin. And that really, so he said, why don't you design the branding unit? It's about India and it's about legacy of India. So I started looking at typography. So as a product designer, I think it was really nice to see the founder of a company actually see design as a wider field and not as straitjacketed within what you learn. So it got me to, I used to hand paint these really far, place them, I think close to about 20, 30 meters from this base. I showed to him, then, miniaturize them on a photocopier. And of course, finally, this branding unit still exists there. And then, of course, I started, slowly getting back to watches. And I think the first thing that I did was to kind of look at, what I was fortunate to be in Titan at the right time. I think there were two European designers at that point, much older than me. This was Alain Écoute and Jacques Meyer.
Yeah, Jacques Meyer, yeah.
So they actually, for me, the age difference was such that I would just tag along and learn. So my interest was in just learning. So I had zero ego on this, and so it got me to travel all over, Europe, as well as the manufacturing side, which is the Far East, which is China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and it started opening my eyes to what design is. And I think travel does a huge lot to make you realize. And just looking at it, then you'd be standing next to a bus stop and seeing details there where everyone else is looking at big buildings. So it really opened up this whole thought of what design can do. And I think for me, then benchmarks were not about India. It's about, how good are you, so it started pushing me to maybe look at competitions in some way. And I think that was one of the reasons that got me to push myself to try something that, recognizes you at a global level and sort of, just patting yourself on the back that you're a decent designer. So I think that really got me going on other things in watches. And here's Kaushik. I think I have a lot to credit to Kaushik, because he was a very, very open-minded person, very small ego. So he was more a friend than a boss in many ways. And I think he kind of let me be myself with what I was good at, and that's how I kind of thrived and grew. And I think he also set this whole idea of the designers can't work in isolation. You have to be in touch with a manufacturer, a marketing person. So our dialogues with in the domains that work with design actually started coming alive at Titan. I think that's something that definitely Kaushik is to be credited for, because he was quite conversationally he could get along with a vendor or an engineer or anyone. So I kind of learned a lot on that from it really opened up a lot of things. I traveled a lot of Europe helping him. So we actually collectively designed a lot of watches for Europe initially, and then kind of moved on to what I did for India. Here's a couple. I just found these yesterday, these catalogs from what we did for Europe. And so you started learning sensibilities in Europe, and at that point, watches in India were just completely gold-plated, very ornamental, and so started getting the sense of certain amount of sophistication and thinking, detail, attention to detail was huge in terms of learning at Titan. I think it's almost like a real estate of 2 square inches on your wrist has a world of details. So in some way, you kind of start applying that when you practice to everything else. So I still wasn't familiar with computers, so I was still sketching them like this. And I'd sit with an engineer and get him to use my sketch and then draw it and then draw over their technical drawings. And then what you see is here's this concept to a finished product. So I mean, my interest was in right down to how things would be done. So I wouldn't just sketch things out of the blue. It would be a lot about just exposing myself to making processes.
So, Mike, I want to give you a break. A small break. You talked about Kaushik, and we all owe him so much. Probably after every weekend we were at his place, and probably most amazing parties and sessions we had at his place. It's almost like you can walk into his house without any
Yeah.
fear of asking whether you're coming in or not. It became like a default hangout place, and you really said nice thing about that, how he brought very different characters in each one of us. I mean, Neil has his own character of what he did. Each one
Yeah.
found your own little space. Of course, you both of you worked a lot together. On that. But I just wanted to ask you is that that I always saw you. It's just that there's a living, and then we do things, but they're not necessarily we live that life. Uh, Somehow you pushed yourself to do that both. You always liked. I remember buying the most expensive shoes on your credit card, and you're worried about how you're going to pay back next month. And I remember from Kaushik's house, we were completely drunk once on a bike. Uh, and you're traveling next morning to Switzerland. And when we reached home, you were pretty gone. You couldn't wear your shoes also. And we realized that one shoe fell off from the bike. So
Yeah.
in the morning, and then you said, "Leave it here, I won't." And that was really expensive shoes. And I said, my heart was sinking. I said, Mike, don't do that. I'll try and go back and figure out if I can find the shoe. I found that shoe on a bridge, at 3 in the morning, got it back. But just this whole sort of living that whole, you pushed yourself to live that life. And you always, we had an incredible work, but I'm not necessarily we lived that life. But you living, doing, and living and doing was very seamless to you in what you did. Uh, how did that sort of, it a very conscious effort to go towards that, or how did that happen to you in that?
I think for me it was. No, I don't think it was conscious, but yeah, maybe intuitive in some way because I used to sink myself into design, and if I loved something, I should want it. And those days, I think Philip Stark was also another designer that everybody looked up to, and it was those days when there were star designers. The whole thing of Philip Stark, Karim Rashid, and the others. So I think for me, just understanding what they did, and then I mean, whatever salary we had, we've always in debt because I used to just love owning some of these things, and I remember buying the whole Philip Stark juicy salad because it just was a very interesting interpretation. At that point, it was like, how do you take a mundane thing like a juicer and then just turn it upside down and rethink. And I think those things really pushed us. And for me to not just see it as an object in a magazine was see it physically. What is it? How is it made? And I think those things really pushed me to see that can't I try it and can't I attempt doing something like this? So I used to want to own things to understand. Even now, I mean, if I get something, I like deconstructing it and breaking it apart just to figure out how something's done so well. And I think that really got me in debt many times because I used to buy a lot of things that I liked. But I didn't buy it for show, but more for just my own passion for some of these things. So I think that's kind of so we did enjoy our time in Titan. I think our meetings used to be literally our meetings were most of our day.
That's true.
I ended up doing a lot of sketches of all our senior management right through, and finally got quite good at it because you can then abstract it to as simple as possible. And here, I mean, I managed to find a couple of them with me, and these I think ended up being used. No,
it was.
They ended up being used as one of the business meets.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah. I remember, most of our meetings, we sort of, trying to hold my laughter, you would pass me on paper, in skits,
Yeah.
skits and that. I found another very interesting thing about you, Mike, is that, you egolessly did a lot of boring work, okay? I mean, annual reports, I mean, you would ask us, would you want to do it? And I say, oh my God, Mike, I'm not going to do that. But you would just, whatever came to you, you just kept on doing, I mean, that something was because you're leading, or it was just you found that, let me find something nice within whatever was given in the time or that.
I think for me, I mean, I looked at one is, I mean, I like doing stuff which is diverse, but annual reports was not very exciting, but I think for me it was typography and the whole thing of using type was something that I was always keen on, and I never had the opportunity to use it at Titan. And the annual report kind of gave me a little bit of that, which is designing the cover and just brought me the layout and what's the idea behind it, what's the visual thought. And I think that used to I used to like that. I mean, so I was given a lot of freedom. I think Mr. Desai used to give me decent amount of freedom to think and do things in a certain way that was not influenced by too many people. And I think that got me to do a lot of annual reports. But I mean, everything's a learning for me. I think for me, it's all of these are, I mean, literally, things that learning. So, and literally after, I think the Europe stint got us to learn a lot about understanding quality. And I think Fast Track was the first thing that Kaushik and I both worked on. And again, we worked quite seamlessly. It was not like his idea and my idea. If I had a watch, he'd do the dial for it, and if he had a creation, then I'd kind of work on a bunch of things. So for me, I think it was reasonably selfless at that point to just build something that had a singular thought. And I think at that point, Titan was quite fuddy-duddy, and the whole idea of having a young watch for a young person. So we took this whole metropolitan thought and pushed the idea of visual merchandising. And again, this is the only picture I have of this, but it just kind of we took this whole thing of metropolitan cities. And so I think the whole for me it was not about me as the designer, but what we could do collectively has always had a lot of impact. And most of the work actually has that influence. It's not somebody. I mean, there's an engineer behind what you create. It's not just your sketch. And so there's credit due to so many people, and I think I recognized that early enough, and I think that kind of moved me towards not doing design as an individual, but more as a team. And I think that's something that I've always enjoyed, and I think I've given designer space, a lot, and I would always take a couple of projects on my own. I think this is one that Mr. Desai worked very closely with me, and I think his whole attention to detail was far beyond designer's eye, and I think that kind of opened up all our eyes. I mean, he never looked at the front of the watch; he'd look at the back of it and then say, "This is not done well." So it kind of created this whole passion to get things really to the best you can possibly do. And I think this collaborative thought also in some ways was seeded with a lot of these projects. I think the fact that you have to work with an engineer, an R&D person, a manufacturer, just opens up that everybody has a role that's really incredible. I mean, for me, it was a shape, but somebody who's creating that movement, and the watch can't work without that working, right? So, and the responsibility of designers, how do I create a watch that expresses that, that beauty of the movement that you don't see, a consumer doesn't see it at all. And so you start respecting the space of everybody's contribution in some way. And it kind of somewhere, if you kind of have the right balance, it kind of leads to really good, really good stuff.
Was age the defining sort of moment in a way? Because it kind of, it truly changed it was like from manufacturing to brought in that design language, which was very new. And it did well, for a Titan. And instead of, what would be that one moment in Titan changed and being in sort of?
So I think the fact that I was not a very senior person then, I was in my 20s, and I was given the responsibility to design Edge, speaks a lot about the senior team's respect for design at such an early stage. I mean, I would say it's one of the earliest companies to embrace design completely. And we had Nirda, who was before, who I reported to before Kaushik. And Nirda was a French interpreter. And Mr. Desai saw a very keen eye for aesthetics in her. And then said, why don't you lead the design team? And we had a very small team at that point. We had a botanist who designed Raga, and we had me who designed a couple of other things. And in some way, we were, like a band that was just about constructing what a design team should be. And it was quite I think that was one of the things that changed the way I looked at design process. And I think the Edge bit did a lot for the company in the sense at that point, I think the world was about big bold steel and not about slimness at all. So it wasn't a marketing brief or anything like that. So it actually opened up the whole thought that you could lead if you actually have, you know, you push the boundaries on every single thing. It's not just about design, it's about engineering, it's about marketability, it's the whole last mile experience. And I think Edge kind of organically became a really um, a brand that every Indian was loyal to. In some way, you were proud that it was made in India. You know? And I think that kind of really had a struck a chord, which is a lot more emotional than about design. And I think that really still sticks an edge. I think that's one brand that's really had that connect. So I think here, just to kind of pick up a little bit of Mr. Desai himself, I think this was the opportunity. I used to get a lot of interesting opportunities on design. You know, whatever came to his mind, he asked me to figure out something for it. And this is one that came with from Mr. Tata. And Mr. Ratan Tata wanted a quality values trophy for the group. So Mr. Desai just said, let's go to Bombay and meet Mr. Tata and just figure out what. I hadn't sketched anything. So I got a brief from Mr. Tata, and he actually sketched, a very rough thought. He said, look at something that aspires for infinity, perpetuity. So this little curve that you see going up, and never meets in the top. So that's what he gave me he just seeded that in my mind. And I was told to be stationed in Bombay for 15 days. You come back every day, show sketches. So I used my watercolor sketches, and over 15 days, we kind of worked through creating this crystal trophy. And then I was thrown into the deep. I think that was another nice thing about Titan. I kind of just wanted to be thrown into the deep. So where will we get the crystal done? So we had the French designers. They said, why don't you go to Baccarat in Europe and figure out. So Neil and I went there. We met the Baccarat company personnel, and then said, let's make this. We crafted it there. Then it kind of opened me up to when this whole thing of manufacturing and how do you actually get things done to a world-class level. And the coin itself we have actually got done in the UK with the UK Mint. And finally, it was quite an amazing experience that kind of opened up this whole idea of vendors and manufacturers are as important as designers. If you can't transform them or can't work with them perfectly, you just can't get anything which is
beautiful. Yeah, right. Very nice.
So that trophy itself, I think, opened up a business for Titan in some way. Titan was doing it in some way for multiple, Tata initiatives, and then sports came by, and we did a lot of trophies. I think Abhijit, you've done a lot of them as well. So I think this is kind of it opened up this whole thought that we were designers, a bunch of designers stuck in the watch space. So we started getting work across many different fields, and I think that also got us in Titan for many years. I think each of us have spent more than a decade, with the company, and I think opened up the whole idea of freelance as long as it's not watches.
That's very progressive, Mike. I mean, I don't know who, but that was really, really progressive thought. And
so
you guys equity, we got that opportunity to do all of that.
So we kind of said, I mean, I think there was a point when we were saying that people will get disinterested and move to different disciplines or different categories. So hold them. So I think Viju was instrumental in that as well. I think Viju Korean was part of Titan sale and marketing then. And then we kind of worked this whole idea that if you work 2 years in Titan, after that you can freelance on other categories as long as you kept us in the know. So it kind of helped us open up to a lot of competitions, and actually that was a very nice thing. I think we kept the company informed, and we did a lot of things. This is one that I did while I was at Titan, and in fact, Titan helped me make parts of it at the factory, and which was quite amazing. So I enjoyed it. This was for an international competition, so Taiwan bicycle design competition. And I made the rest myself with vendors, so I got to learn to make prototypes myself and finish them, get them painted, and finally, I think this kind of won the competition. So it kind of really got me excited about a lot of other products that one could design. And I think it started seeding that thought that, maybe there's a lot more that you can do in terms of products. And I started slowly, given the flexibility of, practicing other categories independently. I started doing a whole lot of things. I started building a vendor network. I went to the bench, the bookshelf. You see, I mean, went to the Featherlight company and said, "Why don't you give me a bent ply?" And then they sent me to a small vendor, and I worked with them and got. So I kind of started opening up this whole thought of, you can't do stuff unless you know how to make it, and that really got me interested in this whole space of, the larger than life product design. And I think when I won, I think this competition, Abhijit, you did that afterwards as well. So it kind of opened up this thought of technology and design to me. And I think that's the point when, I think 2004, I started thinking of wanting to start on my own. And that's when I also, it's another project that Mr. Desai passed on to me, which is how do you look at Titan 10 years from now? So I created this concept of a digital band. And that's what, I think it was ahead of its time. It was a smartwatch in 2004, in 2005. So Titan actually took it up to a proof of concept, but by then I had moved on. But it kind of opened up a lot of interesting, aspects of. So I used to dabble with things. I said I should, if I haven't done it, I should try it at least once. So while I was at Titan, I pitched for a project, and I said, they were looking for, rethinking the identity of Cafe Coffee Day. And I just said, let's just do it. And I went and I won the bid for it. But they said, you are an independent person still working. How can you actually get the cafes done? So then I teamed up with an architect, Sandeep Costa, and he actually designed the spaces. I kind of created the whole brand experience within it. And this identity, they kind of took to 1,000 cafes. And that slowly started, making me want to do things, beyond watches as such. There was no reason for leaving Titan, but it was just that whole expanse of things. And I didn't know, I mean, to some level, I mean, the fact that we had tested waters with freelance like this, I was comfortable that if I left, I'd be able to start something. And I think that's the journey, Abhishek, when I started,
take a break. I want, there are a lot of things I remember, during this time. One of the things you would talk about is the scale, before even you starting the, your own studio. So you had this vision of scale and an impact you wanted to do in design industry. And I think it felt incredible because you were the very early services company could actually raise a fund, and having a swanky office in UB City. And I mean, it's really good, but I think you had a lot of different challenges, with that at that initial year. So how did it help, and what was how tough it was to really manage that first couple of years, I remember.
Yeah, so I think it was like jumping into a pool where you've never jumped in before. I think for me, I had some experience with the fact that I'd already designed products for clients outside to some level, but to sustain yourself and not get a salary was another thing. So the whole thing started with, I had a lot of leave from Titan, so I said, let me take the 6 months to figure out what to do. And I started looking and talking to a lot of people. And I realized there was not too much product design available to do. And so you had to learn a lot of skills, and I still didn't want to do things on my own. So very early on, I had actually got one of our vendors, nephews, who was a metal turner, to work with me, and he kind of helped me to prototype things. And so I had started building the blocks of an ecosystem. And I realized that without that, there's no way I mean, for me, it was, I could do a lot of things myself, but then you could only do that much yourself. So I consciously said that let's take that risk. And so I started the company. I had in fact registered the company earlier, which is 2002, and then actually started practicing in 2006 and onwards. It ended up with a lot of challenges. So I had already started looking at, what kind of ecosystem should I create? So I had to have an engineer. So I started saying, let me reflect what I had done at Titan in terms of team, what's the ecosystem that would be created for the design studio at Titan. And I started, that was my first hook, I should replicate that because it worked. And that's how I started. I started looking for an engineer, and I started looking for a prototyping person, looking at someone who could then service a person, client. So everybody would multitask, and salaries were a tough thing to kind of sustain. But then I think in the second year of setting up, Biju Korean again, he was an advisor to me, and he said, "Why don't you just get the funding in from somebody you know?" And so he introduced me to Technopack, and we started off some kind of a relationship where my assumption was that they would bring in the reach for design, and since I was an individual, I'd get that reach from another company. But unfortunately, that kind of didn't work, and I was back to myself. And we, at one point, I remember, I think in the third year, we were actually down to close to some 80 rupees and 15 employees. So we really had to, try and figure out what to do. And it's just that you don't give up hope. It's and there's something promising in the long run. So we kind of figured out how to get a loan, and then just managed to build that. But it made us learn that getting your money from clients is as important as just creating an idea. So you start building further on your ecosystem, and you kind of create a fairly robust system that has a certain amount of redundancy. So you can't, your chances of failure needs to be a lot less. And I think that's what slowly started happening. I think the learnings are that you don't get what you want. When I started off, I had this dream that I had to do product design. I want to create the best products in India and be known for Indian product design. And I think product design was very, very new in India as well. So nothing happened, and I was then said, let me take what comes by my way. So I had a chat with Ravi Prasad of Himalaya, and said he was looking at doing a calendar, and I people knew that I was also inclined to this whole visual space as well, and said, why don't you look at doing a calendar for us, and you come up with an idea. And he said Himalaya is about science and nature, and so I came with a lot of ideas, and finally I bounced this whole X-ray thought with him, and I actually physically colored these X-rays in, and by then I think Coral Draw came into my life, and it kind of eased out my drawing to some level, but became almost like a handicap for some time. I illustrated these for them, and then they loved the idea of science and art and nature, and the whole thing of what's science and nature. So X-ray is about science, and it kind of really opened up this whole concept of looking at science and nature. So I did a couple of calendars for them, and then this slowly opened up to conversationally. It was not about a brief. They said, why don't you look at X-rays being part of your personal care line? And it slowly, egged me into product design. He said, why don't you design the containers for the hair care line? And it was a huge challenge, because I think the whole thing was, how do you gauge a client's perception of work? It's not your idea only, it's the brand's thought as well. It's finally the brand that has to sell this, not you. So you start figuring out that balance, and how do you draw that line between how much of your stamp should be in it, and how much of the client's brand should be original. So it kind of really, we literally, for this one first project, I would have done at least some 30, 40 designs, and continuously worked at it, and something clicked. There's no science to it. One of the containers clicked and said, wow, that looks interesting. And you can see one of the older versions on the left, sorry, the fourth one on the left has. So it just became conversational dialogues, and you start pinning what works. And I think that slowly opened up to, okay, I can't just design a container, I need to do the label as well. So it opened up to, how do you expand your team, build it up to a more comprehensive team. And I think that took me onto a journey on design, and we got a lot of work across many, many fields. And I wouldn't say path-breaking work, but it made me learn a lot. And I think the turning point was the Batten. This was in 2009, and it was an open bid, and we were still a small company, and we won the bid. We actually went down Hosur Road, picked up soil, and created a rough mock-up of a Batten and showed it to the committee, and they loved the idea of it being symbolic. And so then they said, you're too small, you can't be hired for this. So get the right partners, at least to have the confidence and belief that you can actually deliver, because the project was not about design, it was about making these battens and delivering the battens working. And we had no tech in our team, we had no software in our team, we had no manufacturing, nothing. So I started looking at partners, and I went back to my company Titan and then kind of said, can you help us with CNC milling of aluminium, Tanish for the gold leaf, Carborundum India for their lab to work on fabrics and soil, and BEL finally said, they put an entire team of 45 people for this. And I think in a time of 9 months, we created the pattern and supplied it to the games, and it worked perfectly well right through. So it kind of taught me this whole idea that if you have a vision, you drive it, but you can have everyone contribute really well. I mean, it's not about this is my shape or my form. It's a collective at the end of it. And I think somewhere down the line, my whole thoughts been about collectives, and collectives normally end up not being as diverse as individual work sometimes. But if you have the right equation with people, I think it kind of opens up to a lot. So I think this really got me to an interesting space, and I said I need to kind of expand that. So what I did at Titan, I kind of started expanding to things with clients across. So we did the Formula One races in India, we did the World Cup Kabaddi, and a lot of things. I mean, finally, it's a space that we enjoy. It's cultural. It's not really product design, but it's something that kind of gets me to. So I look at it as product design, because we kind of engineer these to work really well. They fit really well, and they're not handcrafted. They're hand assembled. So it brings alive an interesting, sculptural break to a lot of the work that we do, which sometimes can be, quite straitjacketing. So it kind of brings me to this thought of, for me, storytelling has always been a powerful thing as a medium, and I think storytelling is very important in design. And I think that started getting embraced by companies a lot. I think we did a lot of work with Jaguar, and this one product actually got their attention a lot. We actually designed close to 30, 40 things for them, and they picked one of these and said, let's do it. And again, this is a collective from the team. And my whole thought was, can we make things memorable? And don't make it a faucet. Don't make a faucet a faucet. And that itself kind of opens up so many ideas around building thoughts that are different. This whole thought of storytelling, I'm not showing too much, but just last mile engagement with the brand. I mean, this is Java, and how do you redesign a cap when you sit as a rider? You actually experience these from a tactile perspective, and a lot of these things start making. It's not about the shape and form, because that's the classic Java, but it's these little elements that bring authenticity. And so design then plays a role that's far finer in terms of that whole get the finish of the experience in, and not just the the large perspective of it. And that's a journey that I've had right through. It's taken me into so many different fields, and we've done this. I mean, I hired an apparel designer, and then we kind of had that as a team. So we had a very mixed team all through, and I would learn a lot, and I would do a lot along with them. So kind of opened up to the whole thing of visual media, apparel design, and I think it is. I don't see myself as jack of all trades, but I think I kind of pick things that are challenges, and push the boundaries on it and see if we can learn something from it, and over time build that expertise. So I think as a team we've kind of expanded so much that it really brings alive a lot of interesting work that the team actually expresses. It's not my work literally, but it's a collective again. But I see that I can influence the whole attention to detail. How do I crack this as a material? What do I, how do I get this effect? And start helping with just the sheer integration of these ideas. So it opened up to installations, and I mean, then you start feeling that there's no end to what you can do if you enjoy doing it. And I find this is a very enjoyable space as well. This whole idea of how do I bridge technology, industrial design, sculpture, and create objects that create a certain functionality for a certain reason. and it kind of got me to widen the team as well in many ways. And then it kind of embarked me on this whole journey of brands. It's a toughest thing. I think Abhijit, you've done that, and same here. We kind of love to have a brand, own a brand, as designers, and we started doing that, and we found the challenges of a brand are not just the design. Design is probably just the peak of the whole thing, and everything else is the rest. So sustaining it, funding it, marketing it, and it just gives us such an exposure to what else is needed. It makes you respect a lot of other things. So just such that I think it's important to kind of build brands, but try and hold them. So I'm actually I'm still quite aligned to wanting to build a brand, and we've done a lot of that, but still pushing it in some way. So we expanded into a whole collection. We experimented with the airport, but I'm given the pandemics kind of really now made me rethink a lot of things, and I think you can't look at retail the same way. So it's I think opened up to many people, not just me. I think it's opened up innovation on thinking, problem solving. How do you kind of reach consumers? And I think this last 9 months have been eye-opening in some ways. Tough, but it's really transforming the way we should work. And it's kind of moving me to, I think I've still been a little stubborn on building products. I don't know how well I'll do in it finally commercially, but for me, I'm just trying to explore things that can make a statement, can rethink ways of creating and crafting objects. So we looked at the whole idea of bespoke. Can we create things as one-off? So if it's one-off, you're not an artisan, so you have to then design the entire system as replicable and changeable in some way. So you can create, say, this chandelier, which is a circular array, but for somebody else with the same system, I can create a completely linear system. So the whole industrial design principle applied to bespoke itself transforms what a chandelier can do. So I think that's I went full circle actually. This is towards the end. I'm back to nature. I've been, like I said, you've seen it earlier as well of my work. Then I've been very keen on on nature. I went back to painting watercolors of birds and all kinds of things there. And I said, let's just do something about this. And it opened up to a thought of, can we look at the ecological balance? Can we look at conservation? And then I started sketching a whole bunch of things, saying that can we do something to promote the idea of conservation, climate change, and the whole idea there. So I think just short of the pandemic, we started thinking of this, and during the pandemic, actually built these up, and then finally tied up with the World Wildlife Fund and said, let's create conversation pieces on conservation. And we built this age-old idea of bottles. How do you kind of craft them? So we took the symbolic thing of can I upcycle bottles to create these bubbles of environments, almost like encapsulated forms, encapsulating endangered species in some way. So it's that one-off piece. And it got us on another journey of artisans, craftsmanship, and we started looking at, and so this is the space that I'm now looking at, kind of pushing, is how do I reach consumers to talk to them about conservation? So we use the team to kind of sculpt apps, almost stylized forms of endangered species, build them up, then find processes to kind of create them, and started building these pieces. And we're now at that stage where I'm very excited about it, but given the pandemic, I need to figure out some creative ways of, how do I reach this message to people? So that's the full circle that I've kind of reached now. It's just a round back to nature in some way.
I can see your childhood sketches in somewhere 3D with the fish underneath and things like that. Really connecting those, connecting back to that. Incredible work, Mike. And I mean, I've seen. I think you valued. You invested on relationship with your people, your peers, your seniors, and it was unbelievable. I mean, the amount of patience you had for everyone, okay, including me at some point maybe, was unbelievable. And I think, as my observation, and is that that's something that asset has really helped you a lot, because you could be so patient with everyone, including senior management, the technical guys. Uh, and it's how is that sort of it really helped you to really move next level, in that entire process of journey on that.
Yeah, so I think for me, I value people, and I think for me the long run is if you can leave an impression that is that's long lasting on somebody. It goes beyond what you do, and in that sense, I've kind of looked at relationships a lot. And for me, yeah, I've been very patient, and I kind of let people fail or iterate or rework very often to kind of get it right. And I think that's kind of had a lot of people grow as well. And whoever's been with me has been for a long time. So I think I think it's all about relationships at the end of it. I think you can't do a great job if you don't have a relationship. So I think that's, yeah, definitely something that I feel is an asset. But I think it also becomes, it's an area that you need to sometimes look at, how sharply can you look at it. I mean, you can mentor, but you need to mentor somebody when you can understand that they actually are as excited as you about the same thing. So there are challenges to it, but I think it's definitely the way for me in terms of future.
And what would be something, Mike? I mean, I know the toughest thing for you to say no, and we had those discussions, many years back. How do you dealing with that saying no issue? I've seen you getting stretched sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's just almost a Yudhishthir character you built, or that's what you are. That whole joy of giving, and how do you? Is there a conflict, or you learn how to manage it over a period of time?
So I think, yeah. So I think initially it was tough to say no sometimes, and that's probably been a little bit of my nature. But I think over time I kind of look at things in a very I would evaluate things to kind of so articulate what can't be done, or just break it down to why it's not possible to do, and therefore in a way you're articulating a no without saying no, making him realize that yeah, maybe this is not the right thing to do. So I think that's what I've kind of learned to do, because it kind of allows somebody to make an error, but you don't just accept it as is. So I've kind of become a lot more stubborn about what an output is from a person, and make him work multiple times to, or her work multiple times to get the same thing, get the right output, because it's finally an outcome of the studio and not of an individual. So at the end of it, it has to speak studio. Nobody sees a name on it, on who's designed it there, but at the end of it, whoever's worked on it has to work. So that's why we always see things as collectives, as a bridge to reaching out and having a consistent level of quality.
Yeah, and now I see you. I would 10 years back, I would never. Being you, you always lived in your own space. You were not going to go expose yourself and talk about yourself, not in public space. Hold this ADI association. I mean, what prompted you? It was something very unlikely for me. I could never imagine you do that, but I'm sure something changed the way you see things. Is it a larger influence, or going back? It's sort of leading the whole joining area and leading that, being president in for a Bangalore chapter. Something not very Mike for me 10 years back, but something changed, over the period. And what was that sort of brought you into?
Yeah, so I think for me, the whole impact of design can't just be with Foley designs. It has to be beyond that. And I think for me, the India's at a stage where I don't think design's even reached a critical mass that an end consumer appreciates who's designed what. So we are so early in that it's important to kind of widen the whole aspect that design should reach everybody. And I think that's whole thought has led to wanting to, I think, work on that whole Bangalore world, attempt that whole world design capital along with the team earlier, led by George. And so that kind of got me into, this make things larger than life. You have to have a larger impact on it, and this is possibly the way to do it. And that one initiative actually jump-started this whole thing of being part of ADI. In fact, I joined ADI just before that actually happened. So in some way, it kind of catapulted it. And I think it's an initiative that, for me, it's not about who, but how many of us can actually impact change. And I think that's the change that at least I see. And for me, the ultimate vision is to kind of make an end consumer, appreciate design and understand, decipher design. They can understand cost, engineering, smart, but design something which is still very abstract in consumers' minds. And I think that's the final, literally the final vision any designer has, reaching out to that person who has no clue who you are, but they say, wow, it's a lovely thing to experience and it works. So I think accessible design is a thing that I'm kind of at least veering towards.
Is that what next for you?
Yeah, so I think that's the thing. I think for me, I need to figure. It's not about brand. It's how many people can you reach and impact in terms of design. So even if it's one product that can reach 1 million, that's better than 100 products designed that reach a very few, small audience. And I think that's the big thing that's pushing me to look at sustainability, look at extremely simple processes. How can I scale this to a very large number? And that's what's been happening over the pandemic, where I think I realized that you need to kind of figure out a way. I mean, not that I have a solution, but from a vision perspective, it's definitely, what do I do to kind of reach out to everybody, not as a studio, but maybe as a product, maybe as something, maybe as an experience. But reaching out is the big thing. Getting just the layperson to appreciate and empathize with design.
Wow. Yeah. So it's really incredible, Mike. I mean, I've known you for 22 years, but just sort of listening to this entire story together, stitched it very beautifully. And I mean, personally, you influence me a lot. I mean, I always say that there are designers, and it's a joy to look at the way you work. I mean, it's just watching either Sachin, or it's so effortless. Federer. You bring that mind, hand, skill, simplicity, connect so easily, and I'm sure. I mean, you're truly inspiring, and I think a lot of people look up to you, and kind of work you've done. I've really set very different benchmark for entire industry. You're sort of leading that and bringing that together itself. This is incredible journey. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think, Sajid, you would like to take it over.
Thanks, sir.
Sure. So first, I'm going to thank Abhijit before speaking about Mike for one leading this and asking all the right questions and leading. One, of course, Mike is extremely shy and doesn't like to speak at all. To make it like a conversation and make sure that it was completely comfortable, that's the first part. So Abhijit is fantastic, and you did it also without embarrassing Mike too much and gushing. So that was the other part. It's like playing cricket with Sachin Tendulkar, but you managed to bowl well. So and Mike, just want to share with you that the key beauty of this format really is about understanding the person behind the designs, and I think the fact that you put these slides together and the way you've shared so authentically, that is brilliant, because we got to see the other side of you, and thanks a lot for that. And besides that, of course, as a big takeaways, and one of the observations I had, and I was speaking to Abhijit before also, is that right from NID, your this thing was about doing international competitions, and I would always think of it as a way to benchmark internationally, not to look with people around or in your peers or around what Indian designers. It's really about being the best. And I think this whole exposure which you shared about being able to travel around the world, interact with the best, and that really set the benchmark. And the other aspect of, you go into a company and to be able to do world-class work, and all that really shares your journey. And I can see the passion is still the same. And that's one of the big takeaways, is it's still an art form, right? From that painting which you shared in school to the full circle, it's still that same passion of observing, doing things around what you love. at everything, right from the Himalaya, this thing. You brought back that science and nature right from the last slide, which you had on, and you managed to bring it back to what you enjoy. And when you spoke about Titan being about graphics and product and typography, so you've managed to keep that passion alive. It's not been a job, and I mean, not many if you know that the company is now close to 70 people, and usually you can get caught up in just the business of business, but that passion is still alive, and that the thing of setting the benchmark constantly, it's wonderful to see. And the biggest takeaway for me is the humility, that Mike, which you knew from NID, is exactly the same person, other than the little bit of gray which is there. But otherwise, you're exactly the the same person. And thank you for staying that way, and thank you for taking the time to come out and share so authentically. It's a, I mean, brilliant session, super
Hey, thanks so
inspiring,
much.
and thank you.